Hi guys, welcome to this episode of the Jn'L podcast. We've got another very special guest. Daria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Daria, and I know Jeremy through our conversion course at the University of Westminster, where we've been doing psychology. My background is quite diverse. I lived in Russia for like 24 years of my life, and then I moved to the UK. My first degree is in journalism, and but then I did a lot of like a professional search, and which like then led me to getting a degree in psychology. Yeah, so it sounds probably a little chaotic, but no, I haven't
chaotic.
how to introduce myself for a bit. Yeah, and I also do some blogging, social media, and trying to keep myself busy.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've just like spoken about anything from your life. I'm always super impressed. I was keen to get you on. I don't think I've met a psychology student who hasn't had an interesting and complicated past. I think we're interesting people.
So, yeah, because careers are never linear. You're always going to have multiple career trajectories, and I think it's quite inspiring when people have multiple different avenues that they've gone through, and it's just like that's just life, isn't it? Not many people just wake up at like 10 years old, know what they want to do, and then follow that path for the rest of their life. So yeah.
Although it's very often expected of you, for you to know after like high school, like just tell us what do you want to do, and it's a demand and societal demand and a parenting demand. They just want to plan from you, and then basically being 17, like what do you know? And I remember myself, I always wanted to become a psychiatrist, and that was like a big passion for me. I was into psychology, I was into literature, I know like philosophy, I just like everything to do with humans, mental health and life meaning, just whatever. Probably because as well something interesting about Russia, because maybe I can ask you, what first things come up to your mind when I say Russia? What would that be?
My ex-boyfriend of a very long time is actually Russian, so I do have quite preconceived notions of that already.
Okay, and what about you, Jeremy?
So I went to school with quite a few Russian boys, and so I kind of have. I think it's mostly shaped by what they've said, but I don't know if they sometimes embellish some of the stereotypes, but they're like the vodka, the kind of brazen attitude. So whether that is just them embellishing stereotypes or whether that is real, I wouldn't know.
I feel like you can see from my ex's parents are very much like PhDs in maths, like you've got to be, top of your game, like putting them in this and this and this and that sort of path.
Yeah.
So I feel like you can see it in that sort of sense where they're quite rigid in what they want or expect their children.
Yeah, it's probably like a Soviet Union, like you see, want to do like science or to be a teacher or a doctor. This is like a proper jobs, as they used to say, like a noble something to makes a societal impact. It was a lot about this in communism. So I think this is a generation of Russian parents coming from that, like higher education is everything, study, like kind of your life priorities. And but the reason I ask you that because I'm coming from a very different place, and I was born in a really small commune in south of Russia, which actually has 10,000 people living there. It's like living in a reality show because everybody's watching you and everybody knows where you've been, what you said, how you're doing at school. Just like you don't have a life. But then my father was in the military and we traveled a lot. We lived in war camps. So I had quite disturbing childhood actually, but then when we settled in that commune, it was like we had probably like one grocery shop, but not a proper shop. It's mainly people selling farmers selling the vegetables. So you're very, very isolated. The only thing I could do, I could read. That was fun back then. We didn't have any technologies or anything, and I think that very much shaped what my interests, because only interest or everything you can find out only through books, and I was like, I really want to become a psychiatrist. But then high school came and I wasn't doing great at chemistry. In fact, I hated chemistry. And but I was always loved studying. You know, still like the best thing I think in this world is to studying constantly.
learning.
Yeah, but my mom is a doctor. Everyone in my family are actually doctors. Again, Soviet Union legacy, because my granddad was very precise. Can be a doctor or a teacher. So there are actually two types of jobs in my family: teacher or a doctor. Is so when I said I want to be a psychiatrist, my mom actually told me, "Oh, well, you think you're going to be talking to interesting people, but you will be." She was using very bad vocabulary, but she said like, "But you will be like cleaning something in the toilet after something," basically, kind of trying to imply that there are these crazy people who will be like just not talking to me about different things, but just mainly, you understood. So, but then chemistry was very off-putting, and I couldn't really do well in chemistry. But then I started thinking that I don't really know anything about the world. All I know about the world is from books. And I felt like, how can I become a psychiatrist if I don't know anything? And then because I won a competition in writing, and I also graduated school with like, I think it's equivalent of A+, but for every subject in Russia for that you get a golden medal. And that means you can get a funding from government for free for your whole study. And I was participating because I tried to get out of that place because I was in the middle of nowhere, like a little tiny village. And I knew my only way out is through studying. I just need to study well and I have a chance. Because, you know, my family is quite typical for Russian family because I have a brother. And if you have a brother, a boy, male, this is all stakes at him. And my mom used to say, "Oh, you just need to get married. That's fine. You just find yourself a nice boy." Well, I don't want a nice boy. It's for my career.
That's what my mum thinks of me as well, to be honest.
You know, and it's just kind of devaluation, and they constantly have to do more and more. That now it's feminism, but back then there was nothing. It was just some just being rebellious, not really knowing why you're doing this. And but my brother actually did very bad at school, like, and still, yes, like saving money for his education. My mom told me like, "Oh, we're not going to pay for your education. If you want to study, just go do it yourself." Like, you know. So, and I got some money from government that funded my education, and I won another writing consent from some universities. I've done well for myself, and I got to start journalism, which was incredibly hard because I had no money and I worked as a waitress in a gay bar. So for a Russian girl from a little country village, that was something. They've given me good tips, and I was very strategical, I think, for that age, because I thought I don't want unnecessary male attention, so a gay bar would be a safe place for me because they wouldn't have interest in me whatsoever. And basically, I got there all my best friends. We're still friends since then. All my friends I've met there. But again, Russia, especially back then, and still now, is very anti-gay. But before, you know, again, you know, the place where I come from is very diverse in terms of like south of Russia, we borders with many other countries, Turkey, Ukraine. So my upbringing was always very diverse. Like I had many nationalities, many cultures. I was used to that, and I felt that was really natural for me, kind of including different sexualities too. So. But then it's very different from Central Russia, where it's like, you know, they're not exposed to so many different cultures as we are. When I moved to Moscow, I felt like I'm in a different country. I don't know who are these people. They know my culture, because the gap between was enormous. It's like 28 hours on the train from where I'm from.
Oh my God, 28 hours.
Yeah. And you're on the train, you're watching like everything passing by, you're like, when's it going to stop? Surely there is an end. And it's yeah. And when I'm in Moscow, you could really see the distance, you know, being represented by how different people are. First of all, they started shaming me because of my accent, because I had very southern accent, which I like, I don't know why I should have been shamed for that, but and the culture is so different, so tied up. So just, I didn't really feel comfortable. It's a different chapter of my life, but when I studied in uni, and I worked in the gay bar, that was actually, I think that is better experience that I almost received, apart from interviewing people for journalism, just watching people daily. How do they behave when they get drunk? Is this a romantic couple? What is this? Like this, I still think like being a waitress in my when I was 18, that was like a best introduction to kind of different like social classes, different groups of people. Was very interesting. But then when I was 20, I was offered a job in one of the biggest Russian newspapers called Izvestia. It's in Moscow. So I moved to Moscow when I was 20. And that was again, happening from me being like, because when I went for journalism, it was uni like 4 hours away from my home, like in the biggest city. But then it was like all the way to Moscow, and that was big. But then 4 hours after I moved to the UK. And the reason that I moved to the UK was largely to do this, because I was really interested in LGBTQ plus community, and I never really identified myself with certain sexuality, and I still kind of prefer to see it as a spectrum and not limiting myself by saying I'm straight on this. I just like want to have a choice I don't like having the final decision in general of who I am, because I just keep it open. I don't know who I am. I might look in this sense, because the world is changing, becoming more complex, and they trying constantly to evaluate how do I fit in with this complexity. But I had a lot of friends, and I think like kind of a lifestyle and mindset was really similar, because Russia is quite homophobic, quite overall, if we say, right? Because they have laws now, anti-gay gender law, because of which I actually had to immigrate, because I done so much writing on the LGBTQ plus community, and then to pass that law, that made it illegal.
Yeah.
So
about so being in the fashion industry, I mean, this is a stereotype, of course, but normally fashion and artistic types are liberal and open. That's kind of the culture around it in other countries. So what was that like in terms of expression and things like that, in a place where you felt that if it was ever seeming to be leaning towards a sexual
yeah, well, I think I should make it more apparent. In my life path, I haven't worked in fashion directly until my time in London. I worked mainly in social affairs department. So my whole career in journalism was mainly built around social affairs, interviewing, reporting. So that was my main focus, is in social agendas. But then later, when I got to London and I didn't really know how to make money, I worked for a fashion brand for a bit. So I have a bit of fashion background there, but it's not like, it was just a desperation act, I think. And I worked on like a conscious consumerism concept, which is again not exactly fashion, but mainly kind of idea making something kind of on a philosophical basis, some sort of representation for a brand. But all my journalism career was within social affairs. That's why whenever they passed the law, everything I did was suddenly illegal, and which was very scary. Plus, only recently I was like working on a piece that was concerned with was a tango artist, like a dancer. He was gay and he was giving lessons to other gay couples when they get married. He was known for that, and he was found next to his car with his throat cut open, and police never investigated it. And there's a general position in Russia. Oh well, this is it's fine. We're going to waste our resources on investigating these crimes. And there are sites in Russia, websites, when people post their addresses, names, jobs, and like actually saying it's like it's a hunt.
It's like it's the USSR, and it's talking about not quite that, of course, but I mean, it's interesting because so much of what you're saying with the culture is so much pushing away from the Soviet Union and everything else. In fact, I'm reading the Gulag Archipelago, and apparently that's taught at schools to really, really show how to get far away from it. So I find that very interesting and almost commendable. However, on the flip side, they're also using that tactic to be anti-LGBT, Q+, sorry.
Yeah.
because I mean, saying that they live there, arrest them, that's the same kind of concept. So it's yeah,
Yeah.
it's strange that they would do that.
Having an external enemy is always handy. Then you can handle the problems on that enemy. And Russia used to be, especially where I'm from, actually, it's very different, and it's not used to be that bad. But maybe after there was a crisis in 2014, and there were sanctions because of Crimea, Russia taking Crimea, loads of European countries issued sanctions to Russia. So Russia said Europe is an evil place, America possibly too, and says this. And our president that's been in power against constitution for over 20 years now, right? White heterosexual male. I think he's a perfect example of this. White heterosexual evil male that it's been very often portrayed, but he actually is. It's an irony, and so they try to find how to take the focus away, because there was no such laws. We had gay bars. Yes, it was never celebrated like here, but it wasn't a trouble. And I haven't had my friends telling me every day that they're scared living in their house, or they found their name posted on the website. But then when this crisis happened and we broke relationships as countries, Putin started portraying Europe as like a place where gay people rape children, and this is no joke. They always imply pedophilia.
Yeah.
When they do propaganda, and a majority of Russian population that lives like below, they're basically poverty. It's a very large amount of Russian population earns like 150 pounds a month, and it's like this. Like, my mom is a doctor. She's a TBI doctor, working with very complex contagious disease, and she makes around 350, 400 pounds a month. Oh. And yeah, and that is very normal. Yet again, there's Russian stereotypes that I always experience myself. It's normally too. When people tell me, that's why I asked you in the beginning, people normally tell, when I say, oh, I'm cold, they say, oh, you're from Russia, you can't be cold.
Yeah.
And I normally trying to give a lesson of geography, saying, well, I'm from the south of Russia, we have plus 45 in summer, we have subtropical climate, so I actually never experienced winter in my life until I went to Moscow. And the second one, that when people make assumption that I must be enormously rich and I have like oligarch husband or oligarch parents, and where in fact, I'm coming from very, very, very completely different background than that.
Yeah.
I just can't believe the £400 a month. That's actually like, people earn that a week, and like I can't even fathom that in my head, that she's a doctor.
Yeah. She's a doctor and she works night shifts to make this money. This is not like her basis salary is probably like 200. The rest she has
angry.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of Russian population lives like that. And there's people who watch national television after working and trying to make their ends meet. Of course, they don't have enough time for educating themselves. They will whatever's being told. And Putin's strategy is generally keeping people in fear. They fear, they scared, and then he has on a Europe. It's also like they're trying to, because people are already in a very bad place, and then you don't want a gay person enter your door, steal your children, and do horrible things to them. But this is how it's being. Or people almost like, geez, my life is horrible enough. I don't want that problems on top of me. And people poor, and how socioeconomic status directly related to your education, how you can access education, and this is in their favor of this government, is just to keep people in this state.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of North Korea, or again the same situation that Russia are running so hard away from, but obviously on a very specific type of propaganda, which is, as you say, anti-LGBTQ+. But yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, but I do think you've shared, just even in that last part, so many different perspectives on Russia, whether it's the multitude of climate, whether it's the class structure, not just being everybody's rich, because you happen to see some people of that kind in London that have money. yeah, I just think Russia is such a big and powerful country, but people don't know enough about it. And so I think that's really interesting.
Ridiculous. It's probably like the top, I don't even like top 0.000, like so many zeros until you get to the people who actually have money. Oh, the thing is, are people silly? Obviously, the people who go to private schools and are billionaires in England are going to be rich. That is not an actual accurate representation of a country with how many, like 100 and something different ethnicities. And like it's the biggest country in the world. Obviously, that's not going to be representative, which is even ridiculous for people to assume that that's even a stereotype, to be honest.
Yeah, and there's 165 million people in Russia. So that's a lot of money, and people who have billions is the 0.0000000, and they actually own around 90% of wealth that is in Russia. All this big, huge corporation, they're basically owned by a bunch of friends who are friends of Putin. So it's like several people in the country own its own resources, which is mind-blowing. And and also Russia very often is portrayed as an aggressor, as this backwards country where bears are walking, people like just, I don't know, are very like uneducated or something, which is I understand that there are certain, problems with our government, but people these days, identify you with the government. And I dislike Russian government, but I do love my country because this is government in the country, not to say things. They are different. Sure. And there are many like fantastic, very special people in Russia. And but the problem is because you get this movie, even when you see like, because I had an interview with Guy Ritchie few months ago, because I sometimes still do some journalism, but whenever it's like an interesting person to talk to, basically. Okay. And I actually asked him like, why in all your movies, if you see a character who is Russian, he always has a bad accent, wears leather jacket, and acts like just, as a caveman. What that's actually quite old, the image doesn't exist anymore. Sure. And he just brushed me off. And so like we don't all have like terrible accents. That's fine. It's just like not fair. Yeah. Because even like in London and in the UK in general, being so open-minded, like diversity values is a part of the whole system and everything. But it's very funny because whenever I correct people and say it's actually not true, they think you will be fine. Like like you are not the one who suffered enough from it. Like it's fine. It's just it just makes these decisions on the go. When they say it's actually whenever BBC author, I can't remember his name, he published a book about Russia with a bear on the cover. And we were like, why would you do that? Because it's funny. I said, well, we say it's not funny because this is me dealing with aftermaths of this, when I'll be made jokes or told things that I'm called, that are what are bears in Russia, or like this is what we'll be dealing with these consequences. It's not funny. But they think if you supposedly image of Russian for them, it's like this white, very privileged, quite aggressive person. Yeah. It's like, but this is not true. But they kind of always kind of brush you all like, oh, you're fine. You don't have anything to complain.
I always said I wasn't going to go, and I'm just not going to go, to be honest.
Really?
All of them. You're part of the problem.
I'm scared.
It's very it's not current climate. It is not really welcoming, especially after protests and people being beaten up by the police in the streets without any reason. But the same as my boyfriend, he's Australian, and he now wants to go because that's shown him so much. Pictures, and even south of Russia, he was like, I didn't know it looks like this. I was like, what do you think? It's all snow. This huge country just covered in snow, like just on the globe, just have a look, like how is that possible? Yeah. But now he actually wants to go, and actually I've managed to, just explain a bit more things. And I think, especially for Australians on the other side of the world, they had a whole this stories of how Russia basically just half developed country, where's bears walking in lots of snow, backwards man, la la la, but actually now they do want to go because it is a beautiful country if you take it with the government.
Well,
Like,
I'm
if maybe
sure.
if I was in some secluded mountains or something, that'd be quite cool. I just like,
You want to
I
experience
would
the
go like with like a charity or something like that, something where I don't have to come into like, do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if someone said to you, I don't want to go to Ghana because, well, I don't want to go to Ghana, there's lines going out everywhere.
No,
Maybe if
not because of that, but because of the government. Not
but
because
again,
of the actual Russian people.
sure, and
Like
yeah,
Daria
there's,
said.
there's situations in every country, isn't there?
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
you can look at America and sensationalize all what their media shows us and think one thing, but there's, like Daria said, she came from a place that's nothing like mainstream Russia. But on your point you were saying about stereotypes of Russians and them not empathizing with how that affects you, I think certain ethnic groups have they have a monopoly on oppression and offense.
Yeah.
And you know, is that, you know, like I say, I think you can point to places like Russia and Korea and things like that, and they certainly have a lot more to worry about than.
You know what? When I used to have arguments with my ex all the time about this, because I'd say something obviously about Black people because they're an oppressed group of people, but then he would like come up with all these facts about Russian people, and I'm like, you know what? Fair enough.
It's fair enough. I mean,
Like,
really,
you do get to, yeah.
I appreciate we're living in a country where we're supposed to hold them to a certain standard, and I get that. But I mean, you don't have to. I mean, if people think of Africa as the deprived place, I mean, think of some examples that you just said there in terms of people below the breadline, or again, Korea or China, or, you know, very big countries. A lot of people are in a much worse situation, but they're not necessarily sensationalized by the media, American media, who unfortunately.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of similarities between China and Russia, to be honest.
Yeah, there are differences as well, the mates.
Yeah. Communism buddies.
But it is in Russia, I think the problem is in the country, because in the UK, you know, it's very often about the skin color. Even whenever you fill out the questionnaires in the uni or anything, you say like white, you put white. Like, well, like my background, my granddad isn't, his ethnicity, he is not Russian at all. He's from Chechnya, it's a country nearby. And like my grandma is Ukrainian. And, you know, it's just, they say like our mixed white backgrounds or anything, but, you know, sometimes it's just such a like very hard to decide your identity when you're an immigrant living in another country where you don't own the language, which for me always been a big insecurity and a big barrier, like thinking like, you know, I when I moved here, I had to go downgrade everything basically pretty much. And also in Russia, you're being discriminated by your own country for years. And that is just, you know, quite an experience itself.
Yeah.
And that is not just, you know, it's a most, when this classification, how they classify you and how much, I know, like help or resources you need to be given to, it's just so kind of, it doesn't always seem like it makes sense.
Yeah. And what people would do is they'd say, oh, but you're white passing, and so you have you don't have microaggressions and you have some privilege, which might be the case, but that accounts for like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Accounts for this. I mean, we are extraordinarily privileged. We might have a few racial discrimination instances, which is this, but we also have privilege that's this of our life, that we're Black, so we can claim, you know what I mean? So I completely agree. There's so much nuance with white gypsy communities versus people from Eastern Europe, Russia, whatever it might be. So I entirely agree with you.
Yeah, which I'm obviously not like complaining at all. I'm happy for whatever privileges that I have, but sometimes I think we're just not seeing through it, and as like assuming that people have it all, that is assumed, because, you know, if they see a white Russian person, so they think, oh, I'm sorted in my life just because as they have this idea that all Russians are rich, have loads of money, because a standard like stereotype of this oligarch riding a Ferrari in South Kensington, speaking very bad Russian accent, and that is just, you know, just not true, and especially as a female. And I also had, you know, I had like, you know, multiple discrimination in my own country. I think it's like a trauma when you immigrate here. You start thinking like how much like fuck ups your own country did to you.
Yeah.
Throughout your whole life. But here is suddenly this white privileged female, and you're like, it's not true. You know, like sometimes it's like kind of gaslighting in a sense.
Yeah.
That you almost can't own whatever happened to you because you're not meant to. You should be grateful for whatever you have.
Not in a sense, definitely. I mean, critical race theory says, regardless of your actual nuance and experience, you are extraordinarily privileged, and that's taught in HR departments in America.
That actually makes zero sense. Yeah. 0 sense.
And your parents could have both died when you were 5, but because you're white, that's the most important factor that we're going to take into consideration. I mean, it's appalling. It really is, and it has lots of disenfranchised communities across the world because of it. And I know you're not making this about that at all, but it's an important point to raise. But I do want to ask you some more of your journey, because you've had some very exciting news recently, and I just wanted you to quickly speak to us about your journey to psychology and your last year and everything else.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. I'll get back to my story. I apologize for whoever is watching it that I've been so inconsistent with my with my story, probably just jumping like everywhere, just trying to cover as many aspects as possible. So basically, I tried to get a psychology education in Russia, but psychology in Russia is a disaster. It's basically not really different to astrology or other like mysterious whatever things. Unfortunately, it's bad. And it's kind of also very like almost a shameful job to have, or basically if you can't get on a good course, you go do psychology in Russia, which is totally different from here. They don't have any licensing or certification of therapists. Basically, you can go on 6 months courses and get a diploma and go start practicing and call yourself a psychologist. Yeah, but so when I decided psychiatry isn't really for me, I started like learning psychology with every resources available in Russia, but then I very quickly become disappointed, and it's not what I want to be doing, not like this. And there are many stories of how, for example, usually a female going to therapy and her male therapist telling her, for example, you just need to get married and you need to start by doing yourself a nice manicure. Each time you come into a session is a horrible manicure. Like, I want you to come with a fresh manicure each session. And then would normally...
What money?
And they normally would then engage in some sort of sexual relationship, because he would teach her what it is like to please a man. It's all real stories. And there are many of such, many. And there is no regulation. There is no BPS or whatever it is here. Like there's no ethics whatsoever. Because there's no education, like it's not established as a profession. And so then when I moved here, I realized here I actually have a good opportunity to have a good quality education that is based on science and had good ethics. And America and the UK, I think the 2 countries really in the world where you have like profession fully established, like counseling and clinical. But I haven't had enough experience, so I've started working in the school. I worked as a primary school teacher in well-being for like 3 years. Well-being mentor. It was for kids who immigrated from other countries and struggled with assimilation, and they spoke multiple languages. Normally would be English and Russian, so they had this identity problems. So I've been doing this for a bit, for 3 years. But then I was really, really experimenting with my life, because I then, kind of became disappointed in Russian psychological settings. I still had good background in journalism, but I couldn't quite fully realize it here, because language, I could never write as good in English as I can in Russian, not that I want to. So I, with my ex-partner, we opened a vegan cafe. In Brighton, which actually was very successful. And then, I worked with this fashion brand for a bit, just making this conscious consumerism model for their business. And then I worked for Zima magazine, London magazine in Russia, biggest in Europe. I worked mainly as a columnist. But then I continued writing for Russia, like columns on feminism, social agendas. And then finally, because my approach was, I don't know what I want to be doing, do everything, whatever comes your way. I even had once I bought a lot of fabric, vintage fabric, I fell in love with, and made dresses out of it. I was like, maybe I'm a dress designer. Let's just take and I enjoyed it. Yeah, didn't last long. But my concept was like finding very cool vintage pieces and recreating them in a vintage fabric, because there is a lot of dead stock fabric that have been made in the 80s but haven't been used. So, and I was like, that's so environmentally friendly and so smart. I'm going to have a fashion brand. And actually had one of my dresses posted in Marie Claire magazine. Yeah, my friend was wearing it in Paris. Photographer came to take a picture of her, and then it made it to Marie Claire magazine. And I was like, wow, there were probably some legs to that, but I quickly know that doesn't interest me any longer. What's next? But some people, see it as a problem. Even very often I see it, like when I delivering therapy, people saying, oh, I'm so shallow. I don't have any stable interests. I get interested very quickly, but then I just get not interested. I said, that's fine. The main thing you're interested. Maybe you just need to try many, 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 many things. And then suddenly all together it will work. And that exactly happened to me. Because suddenly it was like literally like a click. I was like, I felt like I'm a mature person. I've tried things, very different things. I know exactly what I want. I want to go get a degree in science, in psychology, and do a doctorate. And then it sounded like absolutely like insane. And I remember I was telling my friends, I'm like, what? So like, is that enough to tell like your dresses? I was like, no, actually, like I realized that that's it. And so kind of, I think since my high school, it's finally came to kind of a logical ending with this journey. Then it was, of course, very scary. But then I'm finishing my dissertation now. And then I was accepted for a doctorate program in the University of Roehampton. Yesterday, I got my offer after 4 weeks of waiting. Yeah, and I'm very super happy, like extremely happy. I feel like I finally kind of fulfilled my kind of true ambition, like core ambition that isn't about money necessarily or status or image, but something that just kind of throughout my whole life, like just makes it all a sense. So very happy. If you have any specific questions, Jeremy, about doctorate or by anything, I'm happy to answer those. And also tend to overtalk. So whenever I need you to stop, just tell me, Daria, please.
I said that, like, that's my golden line. I speak too much to stop me whenever. So I'm the same. But I didn't want to stop you because that was all so interesting. I'm sure.
I'm in so much awe of you right now. I'm literally like, what? How? Wow.
Yeah. To get in after your master's straight away, before you've even graduated, is just people don't understand if you're not doing the journey.
I know.
It's special.
It is, and the fact that I wasn't even scared. I was scared even to apply, and I forced myself to apply. Remember, we had the conversation. I was like, do I apply? Do I wait a year, get better, and then apply? And then I was like, I'll just try for experience. And then since February, I was on this roller coaster. It's actually exhausting, and I was invited to a few interviews. Went on these interviews, which was absolutely horrible. My interview with Jn'L, for example, lasted around 9 hours at 3 different stages. When they first get you, it's all doctorates, especially in psychology. I really want to use them in appropriate words. Very difficult. Okay, and because it's first of all very competitive, insanely competitive field. Because why? Because psychology is the second popular degree currently. I'm not sure if it's changed, but didn't change dramatically, wouldn't change dramatically. And in the UK, unlike in Russia, to become a psychologist, it's just protected title, like counseling or clinical psychologist, you need a doctorate. Otherwise, you can be a therapist, can be psychological well-being practitioner, can be psychotherapist, but you cannot call yourself a psychologist. A psychologist is psychotherapist who also does research that makes him psychologist. They're also more expensive, and they just different work that they do. But also, something that I asked during my interview with Roehampton, first interview made me like I was absolutely destroyed. I was absolutely completely ruined. Took me 2 weeks to like get over that traumatizing experience with Jn'L, because they just were very pushy. like probing me, kind of almost like I don't know, it's this arrogant kind of attitude. And I feel like I'm actually not ready for that. I actually can't take that. And I was like, okay, I'll take a year break. But then CT, other interviews, and I'm like, it just feels suffocating. I feel like I'm trying so hard, doing this work placements, trying to get clinical experience, not being paid anything. And I haven't got any family to support me. I haven't got a rich oligarch Russian boyfriend to give me millions to spend on my Jn'L bags every day. I haven't got any of that. It's extremely hard. But then when I had an interview with Roehampton, I was like so kind of, because in at first I was like frustrated, upset, that then I had this kind of healthy anger, like what the actual is going on? And then whenever they asked me, like, do you have any questions? I give them a very long talk on saying this profession has some serious issues. And they were like, why is that? I was like, well, there is a big diversification problem of the profession, because people who can afford to do this come from very, very privileged backgrounds. And I constantly feel like I'm not one of those people, and this is not designed for me. This is not for me to be here. This is for some special people. And I think this is a problem, because what I can bring to this profession, I can bring lived experiences, I can bring very diverse background, but this comes with a price. And my price, that I cannot possibly be able to not to work, or to work for very little money, because to get onto the doctorate, you need a clinical experience, and normally you don't get paid for it, or paid very little money. On the same side, you need to study and do some research. And that is impossible unless you have very good, solid grounding in some privileges. And I think, like, how come you're counseling and psychology specifically, it's all about humanistic values, and those humanistic values are not represented during the selection of candidates. Like, how is that possible? Like, what is, I didn't swear on that interview, but that was very close.
It's fine, you can swear on these ones. We've got lots and lots of clips of people swearing.
I didn't swear on the interview with Roehampton, but it was very close, because like, your
passion was just driving you.
Yeah. And because about my boyfriend, he's actually helped me a lot, because he is in recruitment, and he was like, come on, I'll give you a role play. And I was like, no, you just don't know about academic injuries. They're quite different to this corporate that you do. He was like, I think they're quite similar, just come on. And I realized, I felt so like, even recreating these conditions of the interview made me feel like I'm in my shell. And then he actually did a very good job. And whenever I was like, oh, bored, he goes, oh, just like, oh, like I'm falling asleep. And then he kind of showed me. So whenever I was talking, like, for example, diversification of profession, he goes, this is what you need. This is what you need. You need to get angry, but in a good sense. You need to be like, and I actually was like, yes, that is the best interview advice I've ever received. You being paid for something doing that job. Because, I attended the Future Leaders program with you, Jeremy. Remember, we had this. I haven't been to all sessions.
Yeah.
I was useful stuff in there, for sure. The thing was missing from me is a state of mind, actual psychology of like what presence that you create in the room.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Roehampton, I was like almost like my coaching myself outside. I was like, yes, just like, and I like sat on that chair. It was so different, because when my first interview, they're like, hi, how are you? I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm a little nervous. And this time I was like, yeah, I'm okay. How are you doing? I was like, almost like, yes.
Nervous?
Brilliant.
And then in the beginning, it's just exactly like so different. And I was like, almost just, yeah. And then in the end, when they asked you, have you got any questions? First time I was like, no, not really, because I was like, I'm waiting for this injury to start. And they're like, what questions have you got? I was like, I don't really have any questions. And I asked the dumbest question. I was like, oh, because they kind of expected me to ask something. And I was like, well, how has it been like on Zooming and like teaching on Zoom? Which is like, they were like, yeah, it's been okay. I was like, cool. Just like so awkward. And this time is Roehampton, they've given the goals of diversification. That is my question. What the problem is this diversification of the profession? So like quite different. And so I think this is probably the main experience, the main skill actually achieved through that interviewing. Is just how you project yourself into this interviewing space.
Yeah.
Because if you go by the books, they're writing these books. They don't know they know everything inside these books. Like, I want to become a counseling psychologist because I believe in humanistic values of profession. They've written in all themselves. They know. And this is just so much. It was amazing in terms of self-inquiries that you make and how you trying just to be different and just shows that you have something in you that they need.
You show off your interest in social media and everything else?
Yeah, I've talked about my research. Again, criticized the profession, said it hasn't got much to offer to people who struggle with their online well-being. Because at Roehampton, they have very big emphasis on research and separate research interviews their course leader. And he asked me, like, it was actually very, very thorough research interview. And so he asked me like what I'm doing, and I was telling about my research that, sometimes also I think in psychology academic community, people are quite arrogant researching topics that appear like, when you research in cognitive neuroscience, because I'm researching cognitive neuroscience. And what are you researching? And you're like, I'm researching well-being on social media. And it sounds not as cool as cognitive neuroscience. And so I actually try to kind of move away from that, hiding behind some kind of serious, very solid, important, blah. And I was like thinking, what is the problem within something that can inform psychological practice, has immediate relevance to the profession? And I realized that people, including myself, it's hard to, because we know what is offline well-being, right? Exercise, go to gym, eat well. We've spoken about it, Jeremy. I interviewed Jeremy for my research. But what is online well-being? Nobody really knows. And how do you realize, okay, how, for example, with meditation or with any other techniques, you realize, it's this anxiety, I need to do this. How, when you're online, how do you know when it starts affecting you? How do you know in what way it's affecting you? When do you need to stop? Why do you need to stop? People don't have those instruments, guidelines. They're quite lost in all of it. And psychological literature normally offers you reduce your time online, stay away from internet. The internet is bad for you. Okay, we all know that. But what about like kind of practical instructions? There is nothing like this. So I want, as a result of my research, to develop a framework based on CBT or any other approach. How you can, for example, same as they teach you this meditation, mindfulness, and they say identifying the feeling, same kind of similar approach that people could use. Or they could, for example, strategies, you can mute, unfollow, delete, different things that you can actually do beyond staying away from internet and all of that. So I'm just trying to think about that. And then my further idea is that I want to research digital therapy, because after lockdown, Zoom been a part of our life. We do everything in Zoom, and it's become more kind of more people now perceptive to this and having therapy for it. And there is a big problem is usually delivered therapy, basically using critical psychology. It's a lot of research on power balance. And normally you enter in psychologist's office, you're in his territory, and it already creates power imbalance. And I think digital therapy can kind of make it different in terms of power balance. Plus, it can give access for rural communities, people with social anxiety disorder. So I kind of want to research more into that, how we can make this experience of digital therapy better for people. So
amazing. Yeah, that's
that
definitely.
is all just brilliant.
Thank you.
Wow. The way you said that you just bossed that interview, like that's just so inspiring, because like I'm quite a confrontational person. Like I like to get my ideas across coherently, but I do think that in an interview setting, like I would be quite nervous and like self-conscious. But like, if I just took your advice and was just like, no, I've got this, then I think I would actually be pretty sick in an interview.
Yeah.
You would be. You just need to get to this state. You know, you need to be in a state like you're with your best friends in the pub talking about something that you're very passionate about.
Yeah.
So if you get them to think, like Daria says, they know the textbook on the stuff that you're coming to prepare. If you get them to thinking something new that they never thought about before, they're going to remember you afterwards. And they're seeing you as somebody who is adding something, not just telling them what they already need to know. So you just go back yourself, which obviously you did. It's a great effect, Daria.
Yeah. And also, another good tip, maybe will be useful for people. Whenever you don't know an answer, there is always an answer. If you ask something you don't know, don't say you don't know. Say, for example, you know, very often doctorates ask you this statistical test, like, oh, how would you design this 2x2? I know, blah, 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 something you have no idea about. Like you do, but not on the spot. And then you will, and I said in my research entry something very elegant, saying like, well, research is a process, right? So I wouldn't need to think on the spot. I usually would have an opportunity to consult the literature and to consult my supervisor, because it's just really a process, right? Thinking through that. So, and you know, it is a better answer than what basically saying, oh, come on, it's hard to say right now, but you know, maybe like just mumble something. It is a process. Or if you don't know, just, you know, you always can say, show your other side, like you will like collaborate. Yeah, talk to my supervisor. Told you, oh, she's a collaborative person. She would do that. This is like very often they just they looking for your problem solving skills. If you don't know something, what are you going to do?
And it's
that is
true.
Helpful.
Yeah, outdated. So if you have answers that are, you know, present, so which is using things like you have the internet, so why do I need to know that? It's relevant, and again it gets them to think. You know, they probably just use interview questions that they've been using for 5 years where you needed to know, but now you don't. Or, you know, that you've shown problem solving, I think is so good. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of your interview and everything else you're going to continue to do, your blogs and research. I'm sure we'll have you on again, and helping our initiative as well with students. So
thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing everything you've just said, because I think, that all just needed to be said. It's been such an interesting conversation. You're just such a brilliant person to interview. So thank you.
This is definitely like giving a boost to my self-esteem talking to you guys. Thanks so much. like, telling me so many nice things. Thank you.
You've earned it. You definitely earned it. Well, have a nice weekend away, and bye to the viewers.
Thank you.
Bye.